Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see so many of you coming back for more as part of this Cambridge at Home online event. My name is Matt Elman. I'm Professional Learning and Development Manager at Cambridge University Press, and I'll be moderating this session along with my colleague Eve Richmond. And I'm delighted to introduce teacher trainer and Cambridge author Dan Vincent, who's joining us today from Madrid in Spain. Daniel's got he's got 2 decades of experience in ALT. He's taught in the UK, Japan, Ukraine, and now Spain. And he's the author of a brand new Cambridge course for teenagers, Own It. So do check that out, cambridge.org/own it. The session will last about 45 minutes, and during the session, Daniel's got some tasks for you to do. So do keep your eye on the chat box and put your contributions in there. If you've got any questions during the session, then you're very welcome to ask them in the Q&A box, and we'll collect them and put them to Daniel once we have finished. Could I ask you please not to ask questions about certificates, recordings or slides? Recordings and certificates will be emailed to you once the session is finished. We'll also have a download link for your certificate in the chat at the end of the session, and we will not be sharing slides since you've got the recording to go on. Without further ado, let me hand over to you, Dan. Take it away.
Hi, yeah, as Matt just mentioned, I'm in a rather grey and cloudy Madrid. It's nice to meet everyone. I was just looking at the messages in the chat box, and I've seen we've got people from all over, from Palestine, from India, some from Switzerland, Iran, Croatia, the UK, Canada. So it's really nice to be talking to such a global audience, and I hope you enjoy the session. As Matt mentioned, I'm a materials writer with Cambridge University Press, but I'm also a teacher at the moment. I work at the British Council, and I'm teaching teenagers and teaching them online for the last couple of months. Since the new situation began, my teaching has had to go online, and I've had to get used to the differences that brings to the task. And a lot of the activities that we're going to look at today are activities that I've tried with my own teenage learners that I think have worked well. So they're tried and tested, and I hope that you'll find something that you can take away and do with your own learners as well. The activities are targeted to teenagers, but they're also, I think, quite easily adaptable for other ages and other levels as well. So if there are any of you joining who don't at the moment have teenagers, but have students from other ages, hopefully you'll find something useful too. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to do today in the session. We've got quite a lot to look at. We're going to look at polls. We're going to look at jigsaw dictations and readings, show and tell, which some of you may be familiar with, word clouds, again, which some of you may be familiar with. I'm going to talk about the importance of silence, and then web quests and recorded messages. So hopefully we'll have time to get through everything today. I am going to ask you to participate at some stages, primarily in the chat box. So I would like you to participate. And there will be moments when I give you some time to do the tasks that I'm asking you to do, where I won't be speaking quite so much. There'll be a few moments of silence here or there. Those of you joining on Facebook Live, you might not be able to take part in the polls, but we'll see the questions on the presentation. So you'll be able to see everything that everyone on Zoom is seeing as well. Okay, we're actually going to start with polls. Now, we're using Zoom, or I'm using Zoom at the moment, which is one of many platforms that people have begun to use for online teaching. There's a range of others, and they all have different kinds of functions, different features that you can use. One of those common is polls. And I'm going to show a way that you can use polls, or different ways that you can use polls to do different activities that I've found have been engaging with my teenage learners, and hopefully will be engaging with yours. So I'm actually going to ask you to do a poll. It consists of 7 questions, and we're going to upload the poll now. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to answer those questions. And then when you've finished, we'll go through one by one. Those of you who are joining on Facebook Live, you may not be able to see the poll or take the poll, but as I mentioned earlier, you will be able to see the questions in a moment because they're going to be on the presentation. There are several thousand people joining at the moment, so that's quite impressive numbers. I'll give you a couple of minutes while you answer those questions. If anyone has just joined and you're wondering why there is silence, it's because the participants are busy answering some questions on a Zoom poll. Those of you who joined, you may be able to see the poll now, and if not, you'll be able to see the questions in a moment. Don't think too hard and too long about the answers to the questions. Some of them are more challenging than others, but the idea is just to give you to give you ideas of the different ways in which you can use the poll functions on your platform, be it Zoom, be it Webinar Jam, Blackboard, or whatever platform you might be using for online classes at the moment, how to use them in a way that engages learners. I'm just going to take a look at the chat box and see who else has joined us. We've got some people have finished already, super fast. Some of you are putting your answers into the chat box, but you can also put them onto the poll. Great. And still some people are joining us. There's one from Ecuador, I see. Okay. Okay, some from Argentina. Some of you have answered the one about meeting your students at a party. Someone from Japan. Okay. Okay, it might take a little while for everyone to finish the poll questions. So we're going to look at the questions on the presentation. You can complete the poll if you like, and then we'll see the answers a little bit later on. The first question that I asked people was this: what are the missing words? And the answer, which most of you seem to have got, was number 3. This is a very simple way you can use a poll, and it's a language exercise, a gap fill exercise, but made slightly more engaging by putting it into a poll and having the students answer in that form. But I'd like to just pay a little bit of attention to the sentence that I asked you to look at, which is that teaching online can often take it out of you, which is why it's important to plan the class to include stages where the learners work in pairs or groups while you monitor them rather than simply talk to or at them. I think in any lesson, whether it's face-to-face or online, it's really important to have the students really actively involved. So not just listening to you, not just silent, particularly in a language class, but doing something with the language, doing activities, doing projects. And when you plan your lessons, it's really important to include stages where students are working in pairs or groups. During those stages, you're still being the teacher, you're still monitoring them, but you're giving them the space to actually participate much more actively. And it also, from teaching online, it gives you a chance to have a little bit of a breather, where the focus of the lesson is not so much on the teacher, but more on the students. Okay, this, for those of you who've just done it, that's the answer, which and then. Okay, the second question that I asked people in the poll, again, a very simple language focus. Here we've got vocabulary, complete the collocation. Hopefully most of you got the correct answer, which was bitterly. I was bitterly disappointed. Again, it's a very simple way that you can use a poll function, which is one of the most basic functions of all of the platforms, to make a vocabulary exercise more engaging. You can have students write their own questions as well and test each other, and you can prepare the poll with the questions that they've come up with. Again, another simple language activity that you can do using polls is to do the odd one out. Here I've chosen slightly more complicated or slightly more unusual words than I would with most of my students, but I thought this would be a bit more challenging for the participants of this session. And the answer is, of course, number 4, taciturn. Then you can use polls to do quizzes, which either you can prepare or the learners can prepare the questions for the quizzes. Here I've asked a question about the English language, and it's according to the 3rd edition of the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language, which was published last year. How many speakers of English, native and non-native, are there worldwide? It's very difficult to determine who exactly is a speaker. Does it have to be someone who has native-like fluency or someone who has just functional fluency? I think it's quite a broad definition. The answer is 2.3 billion. And the interesting thing is that although the number of speakers of English is increasing all the time, the rate of growth is actually declining. But at the moment it's 2.3 billion. So you're all included in that number. So again, polls are a very simple way to do online quizzes that either you prepare or you have the learners prepare. We're going to look a little bit later at another kind of quiz that you can do with students, and polls can be used then. The 5th question was discussion. Secondary school learners should be allowed to use their mobile phones in class for study purposes. How far do you agree? Some of you have chosen agree, some disagree, some strongly disagree, etc. This is a way to use the poll as a springboard for discussion in class, to find out what everybody thinks and then to build a class debate or a class discussion based around those answers. My personal response to this would be that I agree secondary school learners should be allowed to use their mobile phones in class, but only for study purposes. And it's very difficult to get them to, well, not to use WhatsApp, just to chat with their friends. But your mobile phone is basically a computer, and I see no reason why they shouldn't use it to study with in class. This leads, again, any kind of discussion can be turned into a poll question, and again engages the students much more readily, much more quickly, and makes use of the online tools which are not available face to face. So it's a place where online teaching is actually favourable to this kind of activity. Number 6, I saw some of the answer to this in the chat. If you bumped into one of your learners at a party, how do you think they would react? Some of you said they would scream. I'd like to think most of my students would say hello, but I can think of 1 or 2 who would pretend not to know me and a couple who would hide, but I hope they wouldn't scream. Now, this question is introducing a language point, and some of you may have noticed that it's introducing the second conditional. So polls with the question and responses can also be used to introduce language points in a much more engaging way than a straightforward grammar presentation on the whiteboard, for example. If you were to start with this, then you've begun with the meaning, and you have already set the class up with the language point incorporated, and you can come back to focus on the second conditional later. And of course, you could have a whole range of these questions. If you found a wallet in the street, what would you do, etc. If you won the lottery, what would you spend your money on? You'll find this kind of activity quite often in course books, and teachers often prepare these kind of quizzes as well to introduce different language points. But using polls is a way to make it more interactive. Okay, the last one, I've asked you to help decide the order of today's session. Which of these activities would you like to do next? I'm not able to see people still answering, so we're going to move on to word clouds in a moment. But this is a way to get students involved in both how they study and what they study. It's called directed choice. Students quite often are very passive in the classroom. The teacher teaches, but the teacher also dictates what is taught and the order in which it is taught. And I think that can be very demotivating for learners. And there are very simple ways that you can involve them that make them feel much more engaged, much more motivated, and as if they are in charge of their own learning. One of those is simply to give them some choice over what topics they're going to study, or what order they would like to study those topics in. It still means that you can cover everything that you need to cover, but you have given them some input, allowed them some input, and it's really engaging for students. I've done this with my own, allowed them to choose what we study in the next lesson, allowed them to choose whether we do the listening or the reading, for example. And when it's put to a class vote, it's very democratic. So if 15 have decided to do activity A, but only 5 have decided to do activity B, they realize that the responsibility lies with them. They've chosen what comes next. I really recommend you to give the students some choice, and you can use polls to do that. Again, you'll find that engages students. We have got the answers, so I can tell you for number 7 that most people want to do jigsaw dictations next. So you have chosen what comes next, and so let's move on to that. Before we do, however, I'd like you to read just this text, which I've just put up on the screen now. Have no fear, we're all still here. This is quite a long text, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to read it. And I'm not going to speak at all while you read it, so there'll be a period of silence. I'm going to time this. You have 2 minutes. If anyone has just joined, we're just reading the text on the screen. Okay, I'm actually going to give you a little bit less than 2 minutes, because I think by now you've probably got the point that when you're teaching online, giving any kind of session online, it's often very tempting to feel that you need to, somebody, either you or the students, need to be talking all the time. We're not used to silent phone calls, for example, or silent Skype calls. So there's a temptation, I feel, with online learning for the teacher to talk, or for the teacher to have the students talking all the time. But there are times, as in an ordinary face-to-face class, when you really need to give your learners time to read, time to answer questions, time to do the exercises, and fundamentally, time to think. And during those times, silence is actually your friend. It's absolutely fine to have a few periods of silence. It also gives the teacher a little bit of a breather during class, that they feel they can leave the students getting on with something while they use their mental space to think what's coming next. Okay. So there may be a few more periods of silence coming up in this session. Okay, moving on. Some of you asked, or most of you said you wanted to do we're not going to do that, jigsaw dictations. Now, I'm sure a lot of you already use jigsaw reading activities in class. But for those of you who are not familiar, I'm going to just briefly explain what a jigsaw activity is, and then we're going to look at an example of one that you can do online. There's a little image of a jigsaw with the coloured pieces in the corner, and those of you who have done a jigsaw puzzle will know that in order to make the picture, the complete picture, you need to pay a lot of attention to the details, to the colours and the shapes on the individual pieces, and the little cutout parts on the individual pieces to see how they fit together. In a similar way, a jigsaw reading or a jigsaw activity divides text into different parts, which are then allocated to different students, and the students have to work together to put the text back into one piece. I'm going to show you how you can do that with a very simple story, and it works like this. You take a simple story, of maybe 6, 7, 8 sentences, and you divide it up into those sentences. And then using the chat function of your platform, you give one of the learners the first sentence. You have to instruct the learner to make a note of the sentence, but not to do anything with it for the moment. So they don't read it, aloud, they don't tell the other students what that sentence is, they just note it down. So you give learner 1 this sentence, that's only 9 words, he says to the dog. Then you give learner 2 the second sentence, again via a private chat. This all has to be private so that they can't see each other's sentences. Then a third student, the next one, then a fourth, then a fifth, then a sixth, however many sentences you have, in this case it's 7. Once each of those students has their sentences, they then dictate them to the rest of the group. So it doesn't matter if you have 15 or you have 20 or you have 30 students in the class, those 7 students are going to dictate the sentences you've given them, and then eventually everybody will have everything. So everybody will have these sentences in their notebook. These are still jumbled up, so the next activity is to put students into groups, and then together they put the story in order. Now, this is a very silly story. I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to order the sentences in your mind. Pardon me. And then we'll look again at the answer, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Jigsaw dictations. So all of the students will have these sentences in the notebooks by now, and then in groups they're going to work together in breakout rooms, discussing how to put everything back together. So you've probably guessed the story anyway, which is this. A dog walks into the telegram office one day. He takes out a blank form and writes the following message on it. Woof, 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 woof. Then he hands it to the clerk, who looks surprised. That's only 9 words, he says to the dog. You could have another woof for the same price. The dog replies, but that would make no sense at all. So it's a very silly story, but when it's separated, it's quite confusing. And the students need to really talk to each other to rearrange the sentences to work out what the original story is. This is good for very many different reasons. The students who have to dictate their sentence get lots of good pronunciation practice. They have to make sure they pronounce everything very clearly in order for the dictation to work. The students who are listening, which is everybody at some stage, are practicing listening because they're writing down what their classmates have dictated. And then when it comes to the breakout rooms working together, everybody has to talk. So they have to discuss the sentences, they have to talk to each other to work out the order it comes in. So it's a simple activity that practices pronunciation, speaking and listening, and of course focuses on the meaning as well, depending on the story that you choose. That's how to do a very simple dictation using the chat function and breakout rooms, which students really enjoy. So I'm going to just go through it again to make it clear the stages of that. And again, the recording will be available later if you want to go back over the process. First, you take a text that you'd like to focus on and you divide it into individual sentences. Then you jumble the order of those sentences so that they're completely out of order. Then you allocate the sentences to individual learners, and you do this via the chat function. If you were in a live classroom, in an actual classroom, you would be giving the students the sentences on strips of paper, but here it's via the chat function. Then those learners then dictate their sentence to the entire group. So everybody writes down all of the sentences, and then everyone has everything, but it's still not in the correct order. Then you put learners into breakout rooms, and it doesn't matter how many learners are in each group or which learners are in each group, because by then everybody will have everything. And they have to work together. They have to collaborate to reorder the text, and you would monitor them while they did this. And then you can bring everyone back to the main room for feedback. And the feedback is not only what was the correct answer, what is the correct order of those sentences, but what language did you use to do the task? Was it difficult? Was it easy? Had you managed to write down everything correctly, and so on? That's a jigsaw dictation with a very simple text, but occasionally you might want to do a longer text, and we're going to do longer text here. If it's a longer text, it doesn't involve dictation, but you can still take a text, divide it into sections. Let's call, for argument's sake, 5 sections, A, B, C, D, and D. Then you divide learners into 5 groups. So 1 group for A, 1 group for B, 1 group for C, etc. And then we're still thinking about lessons online, how to do lessons and activities online. You put the 5 groups into breakout rooms. So 1 per group, 1 breakout room per group. Next, you share 1 section of the text with each breakout room. So group A gets section A, group B gets section B, group C gets section C, etc. Then you have to give learners time to read and understand their section of the text. You can include some comprehension questions to help them with this, some vocabulary input, but they can also help each other. So this is all happening at the same time. Everyone is in a different breakout room, the different groups are discussing and making sure they understand their texts. Once that's done, then you create new groups. And in each new group, you need to have 1 student who has read section A, 1 who has read section B, 1 who has read section C, 1 who has read section D, and 1 who has read section E. So that within each group, every part, there is someone who has read each part of the text. And again, just like the dictation with the dog joke earlier, they have to tell each other what they've read, and they have to work out the original order of the text. So you're taking a reading activity and you're turning it into a speaking activity. You're practicing both skills within that activity, and you're making it much more engaging and much more purposeful. The students have a task to do. They really have to work together in order to complete the activity. It generates lots of language. It's quite challenging because it's confusing at the beginning, and in order to unravel the confusion, they really need to work together. And again, while they're getting on with this, you can monitor each of the rooms, each of the groups, which I have put there, monitor the different groups. And then you can bring everyone back to the main room and elicit feedback, which is again to check that they've got the order correctly and also how they found it. Okay, so that's 2 ways to do jigsaw readings. I'd just like to go back to something earlier, which I didn't get to do. I think is quite important. Where are we? Sorry for jumping around. No, I'm going to move on to show and tell, because some of you had asked to do show and tell. Show and tell is something that you will have recognized or seen in lots of American movies set in schools, or American TV series set in schools. It seems to be very popular there, where students bring something to class and they do a very simple presentation about that. This is also an activity you can do online by asking your students to find something very, very simply on their desk or in the room. It doesn't require any preparation on your part. It doesn't require any preparation on their part. Something they consider says something about them. It could be a book, or it could be an ornament, an item of clothing. And then they're simply going to introduce it to their partner using the questions online. We don't have a way to do this with everyone who has logged in today, but I have nominated Matt to show and tell something. So I don't know if Matt's able to do that with us.
I am, Dan. Yeah, I've selected this shoe, which you can see looks a little bit strange.
Can everyone see Matt's strange shoe? That's a very strange shoe, Matt. Tell us about that.
So it's slightly different to normal shoes because the toes are individually separated. I wear these shoes every day, Dan, and I do that because I enjoy running. And in the past, I've had lots of injuries to my knees, my hips, and my feet. And I find that using shoes that are very thin and very bendy helps me to run without injuries. So I love them. I swear by them. But obviously, when I'm out and about, I get some very strange looks from people.
They're very strange looking, and I imagine during quarantine you haven't used them as much as usual.
No, I haven't. No, but I'm looking forward to getting back out in them.
All right. Okay. How long have you had them?
These I've had probably about 2 years, but I had a pair before that, that I had for about 4 years, and I wore them until there was a hole in the bottom.
Okay.
So they're firm friends.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Matt. Please say thank you to Matt in the chat box. We enjoyed his shoe. It's a very, very simple activity, and it practices here, for example, this is a language point, present perfect, how long have you had it, with past simple, when and where did you get it, etc. It's engaging to the students because they get to show something of their own, they get to talk to each other about it, and it requires very little prep, and it also serves a language point in this case. But you can adapt the questions to serve different language points. So again, a very simple activity that engages learners and can be done online in a way that maybe replicates a show and tell that you might do in class. Okay, so that's show and tell. And next, I would like you to, I'm going to show you an online tool. Oops, let me just go back to that. I would like everyone to go to the following website, which is www.menti.com. And then when you get there, I would like you to input the code 752403, and it will ask you a question. So please go to www.menti.com, enter the code 752403, and then if this works, it will ask you a question, and you need to type in a word. Okay, I'm going to share, where am I? Okay. The code is, okay, the code is 752403. And hopefully you can see now a word cloud forming with all the words. The most prominent words are the ones that most of you are putting in. So challenging is very prominent, and I would agree it's very challenging, but I'm glad to see fun and rewarding are also there. Some others, unique, are on the periphery, engaging. There's a lot of you, so we're getting quite a busy, full word cloud. But you can use word clouds to do vocabulary brainstorms where the students share what they already know about a topic, or have, in this case, for example, where they share their feelings about a particular topic, or they give you the names of their favorite TV series. So it's a very quick and easy way to work with vocabulary. This comes from the, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now, hopefully. Well, I'll let it just go for a moment because some of you are still typing in. It's nice to see that exciting is there, frustrating is also there, and I would agree it can be very frustrating. But the frustration is balanced, I think, by the rewarding aspects of teaching teenagers. Challenging, all teaching is challenging, and it's good to be challenged by teaching. It keeps you on your toes and it keeps you learning. And as a teacher, you need to also be a learner. Okay, so we've got a very nice word cloud there. I'm going to show you now. Let me go to a different website. This is very easy to go to Menti, just to show you the website itself. Hopefully you can see mymenti.com page here. It's very easy to make. New presentation. I'm going to call it test. I'm going to create a presentation. And just to show you here that you can choose various things. Word cloud, which we just looked at, ranking, exercises, Q&A, multiple choice, the word cloud. My question is, what's your favorite color? And I believe people have more than one favorite color. So I'm going to put entries per participant 2, and then you can simply share it with the code at the top. So it's very, very quick, very, very easy to do. Okay. So we're going to go back to the presentation now. You can play with that later. Okay. So that's menti.com. Now, moving on, we've done Jigsaw dictations. And I would like to, now that we've looked at a few different activities, we've done the jigsaw, readings and dictations, we did the polls. I'd just like to say something about the about using activities in general, and that is that although this session is entitled Engaging Activities for Online Lessons with Teens, I think it's really important that the activities serve your lesson objectives. It's very important for them to be planned and prepared, as in anything in class. It's going to work much more smoothly and will be much clearer to the learners if you've planned and prepared it well. But they need to be pedagogically appropriate. That's a tongue twister. By which I mean that you need to start with your lesson objectives. You need to think what you want the students to achieve during that class, what your aims for them are, and then select activities which serve those aims. So for example, if you're teaching the difference between present perfect and past simple, the show and tell activity is a really nice way to introduce that. If you have the second conditional as a language point, you might choose the poll function to introduce different scenarios which use that language point. And purposeful, as far as possible, students need to understand why they're doing something, or they need to have a goal to work towards. So for example, in the dictation, the task is to put the text back together. There's something that they need to do with an outcome. They'll be much more engaged and much more motivated when they know that there is an end result, that they're working towards something. It might not always be so clear what that purpose is, but you could still explain to students that we're going to be practicing this language point, or you're going to be developing that skill using this activity. I think a very easy way to engage learners of all levels and ages is to make it clear why they're doing what they're doing, or why you're getting them to do what you're getting them to do. So I've called this the 3 Ps, although there's actually a lot more Ps in that, so you get 8 for the price of 3. They should be planned and prepared, pedagogically appropriate, and also purposeful. So don't choose activities simply because they're engaging, but choose engaging activities because they fit well to your pedagogical purposes. Okay, the next, and I'm not sure how much time we have, just maybe the last activity that we're going to do today is using a website called vocaroo.com. I'm going to post a link into the chat, so please stop chatting for a moment. I'll keep posting it if I can. And I would like you to click on the link that I post. No, I don't want to do that, do I? I want to show you first. Let me go back to that. This is the website Vocaroo, and it's a very simple tool for recording yourself and sharing those recordings. So I'll just show you how it works. You go to the website, you click on the record button, you say, hello, my name is Daniel, and I'm in Madrid at the moment, giving a session online. You stop, and then you can save and share. It's very, very straightforward. You can copy and paste the link here, or just by clicking on that. Okay, I've pre-recorded a message. This may not work so well, but let's try. Okay, I would like you to click on the link that I have just posted. Let's see if this works. It's coming, if not, it's coming. Okay, well, I'm going to explain to you instead how I would do this. This is a very simple tool. So here you record, and then you can ask your students to copy and paste. It's a very nice way to get students to record themselves, and getting students to record themselves is a really pedagogically solid activity. They can record themselves doing different speaking activities, and then they can send the recordings to you either via email or via the chat if you want to do it during class. That gives you a very nice way to pay attention to each individual student by listening to their different recordings, which is not always possible in class. And they can also listen to their own recordings, which can be a little bit However, it will help them to focus on what they can do well and what they need to work on. That works particularly well with the speaking parts of some of the exams, such as the first certificate, the advanced exam, or the proficiency exam, where students have to give a monologue. They have to talk alone for a couple of minutes. They can listen back to what they've recorded, and hopefully that helps them to improve each time. It can also be done as an activity that replicates WhatsApp messaging between students. So they record messages for each other and then they respond to those messages. It's a very simple tool that I recommend you to use. We haven't been able to do it here, but have a play around with that later. Okay, so we've only got a few more minutes, I'm afraid. So we have time for some questions, I believe. I think Matt has been collecting questions, perhaps.
Hi, Daniel. Yeah, I've got a few questions here for you. Quite a lot around the individual tools that you've presented.
Okay.
So perhaps we'll start with polls because that's where you started.
Yeah, sure.
And I wonder if you could just give a very brief outline of the process of creating a poll in Zoom.
Okay, at the bottom of Zoom, you have a toolbar where you have your microphone and camera icons. So you can switch your microphone on and off, and you can switch your audio on and off. Then a little icon with people, which is participants. And if you're the host, you will also have a poll icon. When you click on that, it will take you to the Zoom webpage, if you have an account, where you can create a poll there. And it's a simple case of just typing in the question and the answer and then saving the poll. And then you have that available anytime you want to use, during any session that you wish to use it. So you can prepare the poll, and then when you next come to do an online class with Zoom, you click on the poll icon on the little toolbar, and it should be there. It'll be there waiting and ready for you to launch. You launch it, you give the students time to fill it in. When it's done, you'll get a little notification and you can share the results. That's how it works for Zoom, and I'm fairly certain it works in a similar way for other platforms as well.
Great, thanks, Dan. A good question here, which is when you do polls with your classes, do you keep them anonymous or do you show the students' names?
Yeah, I forgot to say that. You have the option to keep them anonymous, and I would keep them anonymous. And I think that works really well when you're asking people's opinion in a kind of, how far do you agree with this statement? It's quite nice. Everyone feels they can express their opinion on a particular topic without it being associated with them. Especially with teenagers, sometimes they can be a little bit shy about saying what they think, and you can let them know before you do it that the results are anonymous.
Great. Good question about the Jigsaw dictation, because we had a lot of appreciative comments for the text there that you chose.
Okay.
Somebody asking where can they find good texts like that? Have you got a source that you'd recommend?
I don't have a particular source that I would recommend, but I would recommend using it for some of the reading text, for the longer reading dictation, rather than having a straightforward reading with comprehension exercises that come after that. Using the texts that teachers maybe already have that are in their course books or that they normally use in class, and turning those into a reading, a jigsaw reading. For shorter text, I'm sure you can find various on the internet, but I wouldn't go looking for a text in order to do the reading jigsaw or the jigsaw reading. I would start with the text that you want to focus on, and then decide if you'd like to do a reading jigsaw with that text. So the activity serves the text or serves the lesson rather than the other way around.
Yeah, that's a good general principle, isn't it? And that you start with the language and then decide on your activity or decide on your technology afterwards.
Yeah.
Lots of questions also about breakout rooms, and I wonder if you've got any solutions for teachers who are using a tool that doesn't allow them to divide their students up into breakout rooms.
I think for most of the activities, you can still do them with the whole class. So, for example, with the little jigsaw dictation, with the little story, the one about the dog, the different students can still dictate that to the whole class, and then rather than working together they would then just have to work individually to reorder the text, and the same with the longer text. The show and tell can be, if you have a class of say 25 students, and you can't put them into breakout rooms in order to have them speak to their partner, you could just allocate 10 minutes at the beginning of a number of classes for 1 or 2 students to do that. Let them know that in the next class you're going to be introducing something, and spread it out throughout the course.
That's a good idea. Thinking more flexibly about your lesson time, perhaps.
Yeah, I realise that breakout rooms are not available, but again, for those teachers who do have them, think about how you do pair work activity in an ordinary class, and then can you use the breakout rooms to do pair work activity. If you don't have them, if you had a classroom setting where you're not able to physically sit students next to each other, you might be thinking about ways to make the lesson more interactive within those constraints in a physical classroom. In some cases, the chairs may be nailed to the floor and you can't actually get students to actually physically be next to each other. But you would be thinking around how to make a class more interactive in that way. So much of what you do online is replicating what you would do in a physical classroom anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's important to highlight that the skills, the essential teaching skills, don't change, do they? It's the medium that changes. I think the last question, we've got one from, well, a couple actually, I think more generally about teaching teenagers online. We've had a few questions along the lines of, how can you ensure that students are listening? How do you encourage them to turn on their cameras? And what do you do if they don't turn on their cameras? Any thoughts on that?
Well, where I'm teaching at the moment, we have quite a strict policy that they have to have their cameras on, and it's one of the things that their parents are notified of if they don't have their camera on for child protection purposes. It's difficult to control students or to do classroom management at a distance, but I really think that if the lesson in itself is quite engaging, then they'll be more likely to be paying attention. And if they have to work together, if they have to collaborate on tasks, there's the added peer pressure that they know that their peers, their classmates, won't be able to do what they need to do if they're also not taking part. It's very similar to a real classroom. You're going to have students who are not paying attention, whose minds are wandering. But again, I think it comes back to the same idea that how you engage students in the physical classroom should really be how you engage them online as well. And I have to say, for teaching teenagers online for the last 2 months, that although there's been a lot of slouching in the chairs, gradually sort of sleepy faces here and there because they've had hours and hours screen, a lack of engagement hasn't really been an issue. So I might have been lucky with my students, but I think it's to go in with the attitude that you can engage them and they will be engaged if you work towards that end, rather than feeling they're teenagers, they're not going to want to take part. I think the teacher's attitude plays a large role in that. Yeah,
completely agree. I think there's an element of trust, isn't there? And I think it's always a good thing to trust our students. But what I really liked about the show and tell activity, apart from my shoe, is that there's a reason for having the camera on. You know, if you're using the camera, then students can see why they've got it on.
There are lots of activities you can do, like have them describe their rooms, for example, explain why they've decorated the room in a particular way. Not all students will be, teenagers will be comfortable with that. They may not be in their bedroom, they may be elsewhere in the house, but anything which gets them using their surroundings, their immediate surroundings, necessitates the camera. And again, it just engages them and gives them a little bit more control over what's happening, and they're feeling motivated, engaged, I think, in that. And it doesn't have to be the whole lesson like that, but knowing that at some point for 5 or 10 minutes, there's going to be an activity where they do need the focus will be on them and their surroundings, I think can help.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks very much, Dan. So I think